stand before the gods of daily solutions for judgment.
That's right, and maybe some kind of nice massage or something later.
Yes, or like a small snack. We like small snacks.
Mostly judgment.
Yes, judgment primarily, and then massage afterwards, and then in third place, like a light refreshment. Any of those are acceptable.
Oh, maybe a float.
Oh, float sounds nice too.
Yeah, we should just go do that instead.
Yeah, okay. You stay here. We'll be right back.
Stay here for judgment.
All right, guys. Hey, everybody.
Hey, this is Graham.
This is Ashkahn.
And today's question for you.
Hit it. Kick it. Lay it out. Slam it down. What's the question? Get it. Get that question. Get it. Get it.
What books have influenced you?
Oh, okay. Books. I'm assuming business books.
Yeah, and I don't actually know how to read, so most of mine
of
are
influence,
audible books.
Like the Hungry Caterpillar had probably a big influence on me.
I was going to say give a mouse a cookie, being on this podcast with you has really reinforced some of the basic principles involved in that one.
So business books that we like, probably the biggest one.
Are you going to start with the biggest one?
We could work up to it.
I was going to start with the most skeptical one.
Okay.
My first recommendation for business books to read is The Halo Effect, because it's a business book about why to not trust other business books, or at least like what to look for in general information consumption to cue you that something might be worth your time or trust.
There's just a lot of bad business books out there, I think is the problem. There's so many business books that are just fluff. Like they have maybe like 15 pages of stuff to say, and it's like a 250-page book.
Yeah, where they're just illogical, Like there's a lot of business books out there that really play on your emotions and not necessarily the reality of running a business day in and day out.
I think it's because like you're a business owner and you're trying to think about marketing, and you're like, I should write a book. That'd be great for my business. It's kind of this like natural thing where like whether anybody wants it or not, there's people out there writing business books who think they have something to say. But and so there's a lot of stuff that people write about that seems like they're backing up their advice, or they're using kind of evidence through examples from the real world that could just as easily be examples that show the opposite depending on your perspective and your context. And The Halo Effect is a book that kind of lays out a lot of those kind of logical inconsistencies. A classic one is taking like the stocks of a company and seeing like 7 years that they did really well and looking at a range of time for just that 7 years. We're like, hey, from 1991 to 98, look, they had this meteoric rise. Whereas you could just sample a different chunk of years and kind of tell a different story depending on where you're setting the beginning and end of the date range you're looking at. There's just a lot of that kind of like after the fact analysis or hindsight, where you look at a company that's done something successful and you assume that these specific decisions they made on the way is what actually led to them being successful. And that's like the business advice.
Yeah. And the name, of course, comes from the bias called the halo effect, which is that when something is already successful in some kind of realm or category, that we're likely to consider it successful in others, whether or not that's justified at all. So an attractive human being is a good example. If someone's good looking, we assume that they're also great at keeping their taxes and they floss every night and all of these other great things about them, right? And so it's the same with business. When we see a successful business, it's really easy to look at things that it did to get there, but that might have completely failed in another case. So anyway, this is a story about books, not about biases. Sorry, we get really passionate when we start talking about logical biases.
It is a really good first business book to read because it helps like give you the the tool set for kind of dissecting other business books as you go forward.
Okay, what's our top recommendation?
The one that probably has had the most influence on the way we run our business, on kind of like the operations side of things, is a book called The 7-Day Weekend by a guy named Ricardo Semler.
Awesome.
Dude's just super cool. Yeah, he runs this like Brazilian company that started in the 80s, I think, early 80s, that started by making giant like parts for big ships. Huge kind of industrial manufacturing, and has ended up just kind of becoming a huge force in revolutionizing business structure, and basically a big proponent of like democratic business structure and just kind of being cool to your employees and trusting them and treating them well and letting them have more autonomy than a lot of businesses were used to doing, and grew the company very successfully from there. Has gone on to teach business seminars, go into other fields like education, all sorts of cool stuff. Just super, super cool dude. Great book. Really, really awesome book to read.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know Ricardo Semler, at least in the United States, as much. I feel like in the business world, it's almost like he's like one of the dudes who influenced the people who now influence business thought. So like all the people pretty much who have written alternative business books on how you don't have to structure things, just like the biggest corporations. And like 37 Signals is a great example of people who have gotten a lot of attention. And Ricardo Semler is the antecedent to that.
Yeah.
Also, he's just awesome. Like
he's
the
just a
stuff he
super
does,
cool
it like
dude.
blows your mind. You read it; it's really delightful to read, and it really
Yeah.
does. It feels like that one is the one I recommend to just take off the shackles of what you feel like you should do in business, and it really makes you realize that there's a way broader possibility of how to run your company.
If you like that book, he's got a book he wrote previous to that called Maverick, which is much more of his like story of developing these procedures and the way that his business runs, which is also like a really great read. Shows you a little bit more of the struggle and how, it's not, you don't just snap your fingers and run like a super cool company. Like it's also hard and it also comes with challenges.
And if you go through that and you still want more Ricardo Semler, he also released a series of podcasts.
Yeah.
I think it's about 12 long with
10. Yeah.
interviews, maybe 10, with interviews with different people who have kind of followed in his footsteps and are using the lessons that he learned in business and applied to his Semco in fields like nursing and education and the police force and things like that. So really cool interviews and in business.
Along those same lines, pretty much every big company owner has a book either written by them or about them at this point. And some of them are good and some of them are bad, but the one by the guy who runs Zappos, Tony Hsieh, is a pretty good one. Same kind of like idea, just running a company that is really nice to its employees and a really cool place to work and really encouraging, kind of creating that great environment to work in. So that's another good one, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of a more recent book along the same lines.
Yeah. And of course, they're really known, Zappos is, for their extraordinary customer service and also the freedom that employees are allowed to implement that customer service, which is definitely tied right into that.
And he's just, I think one of the things I liked about the book was him talking about his own goals for running a business and how that influenced what he was doing and actually just wanting to run a place that was cool for his life and cool for other people's life and stuff like that, which was kind of refreshing to hear rather than just everything being completely directed about growing profits or whatever.
Another one that I'd say is in my top 3 is the Lean Startup, which is another really good template for running a scientific business, I guess. Like it's all about experimentation and the need to constantly iterate and never feel like where you're at is where you ultimately should be. So running a lot of small tests, slowly getting better, and learning from those lessons as you go along. So making mistakes, making successes, and just kind of gradually building into what will be an amazing business. So very centered on this idea of, again, experimentation, constant improvement.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the kind of like pillars of modern business advice is that book. It spawned all sorts of other like books off of it, and a lot of kind of modern business mentality is based off of its principles. This one's not like as directly related to business, but I really like the book Nudge. It's just about like being aware of how you set up your systems in terms of the influence your defaults and kind of basic little bits of I guess like basically how you set up things to make easy paths for people to follow ends up being kind of very important.
Yeah, so they call it paternalistic libertarianism.
Yeah, that's their phrase for it.
Which is basically the idea that everyone should be allowed to choose. You can't just force things down people's throats and say this is the only way to do things. So give people a choice, let them do what they want, but make it really easy for them to choose what's good for them.
Yeah, be aware that what you set up as kind of the default or the normal choice or the first option people have ends up actually being like kind of a big part of what people end up doing.
So a great example is paying people every 2 weeks as opposed to every month, right, for your own business, which is paying people every month and paying them every 2 weeks. You end up with the same amount of money at the end of the year. But if you pay people every 2 weeks, then twice a year you'll end up with months where you get paid 3 times during that month instead of just twice. And it turns out just that difference of 2 months getting an extra paycheck helps people save money better than if they were getting paid every month. And then at the end of that month, they kind of just have this predictable amount that's left in their bank account. So by choosing to pay every 2 weeks, you're kind of nudging them towards saving. You're not saying you have to set aside money in order to be a good employee or a good human being or something like that. But just that decision is enough that people will, on average, save much more money than on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and just super cool dude who wrote that book too, Richard Thaler, who's kind of like the father of behavioral economics.
Yeah, definitely. I also recommend reading Black Swan, and along with that, Fooled by Randomness and Anti-Fragile. It's kind of this trilogy by a guy named Nassim Taleb, who's one of our favorite modern philosophical, economical curmudgeons. He really has a chip on his shoulder for a lot of the ways that people who pretend to know what's going on think about the world. And it's just a great reminder that a lot of the things that happen both in our lives and in business are much more due to randomness and chance than we might like to think. So a reminder to be humble in your successes and maybe not as hard on yourself during your losses as well.
Another good one on the operation side of things is a book called Scrum.
Oh, yeah.
Which is by a guy who invented a system called Scrum.
Appropriately enough, yeah.
And this basically has to do with project management and workflows. And it's kind of the idea that, he really invented it for big projects, and it's been adopted a lot into the world of coding. And basically with big like construction projects or any kind of big scale project, a lot of companies would typically make these huge project kind of flow charts where they'd have
so insane
these tasks starting at this time, these kind of like descending trees of what gets triggered by the next thing stopping and all that stuff. And there were just these beastly kind of project layouts that people would make. And he really wanted to create a more efficient system than that, because he found that frequently people were not even looking at them and always way off schedule and all sorts of stuff like that. And so to create a kind of more agile system, he developed a system called Scrum, which is based more in these 2-week work periods where you kind of like set a small goal, and it's just kind of, you have like these quick meetings, literally where you stand up so that like everyone's just encouraged to have them be as short as possible. And you kind of just go through these little sprint cycles where you work on getting something actually kind of deliverable every 2 weeks. And it allows for things to be more efficient, it allows for you to adjust easier. And, the specifics are not maybe like the most applicable thing to running a float center, but kind of the mentality almost is what I'd say is more valuable to a float center operator coming out of it. Just that idea of like trying to keep an eye open for both efficiency and adjustability in your plans to be a little bit more responsive to the world, and to not get too bogged down into big, crazy, complex, burdensome systems for getting stuff done.
Right. At some point, if you're trying to make a map of the world, you can't make that map one-to-one. Otherwise, it's going to take up the space of the entire world, right? So it's the same with project management or organizing what you're doing. The more you try to document it, eventually you end up getting closer and closer to this one-on-one. Like you're spending more time on documenting and keeping track of the project than you're making useful steps forward. And Scrum is kind of meant to fight that. And another one that I really like is Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes, just because it covers a lot of more than basic sales tactics and things that go into, selling an individual customer. I guess more life philosophies that contribute to being good in sales and in my mind, just being an efficient business person or even an efficient human being. So some of my favorite things he covers are bullheaded determination, kind of just pushing forward no matter what's in your way and getting through those 45 no's in order to get the yes on the 46th time. Things like that, getting the most out of your actions, doing one thing that has multiple results. So although it has almost a cheesy name and might turn you off from its salesiness, it's just an excellent read as a business owner.
I feel like I got to give a special shout out to this book called Sprint by, let's see, I just looked up the names of the authors here, because it's Jake Knapp, John Zaratsky, and Braden Cowitz. And it's about these like they have this very specific regimen for this a 5-day work cycle of getting from having an idea to actually testing it out in the real world and trying to kind of do big development on kind of big crucial ideas for your business. And the specifics on whether you're going to implement this and all that sort of stuff is one thing. But like the reason I kind of like to mention this book is because it is unbelievably specific. When you read business books, so often do they tell you these kind of abstract thoughts or their general theories, and they like don't tell you at all the context or like the workings of how to actually do something like this. And this book is like to the point where they're literally telling you like how many, what color, and what size of Post-its to purchase for like certain steps, and how many minutes like this other like chunk should take. Like it's like shockingly detailed. I just think that's kind of commendable in a business book for someone to actually go to the point of literally giving you like every single step by step in how to do what they're doing. So I don't know, interesting book. Definitely worth taking a look at.
So yeah, if you haven't noticed, we really like books on how you don't have to run business like everyone else, how you should give people personal freedom, and on specifics of what you should do rather than fluffy generalities. So maybe, I don't know, we could keep going forever. Our list of books that we've enjoyed and gone through is incredibly long.
And they get weirder.
Stranger and stranger. Yeah. The nice thing, too, is if you go to look up any of these books and enjoy them and start reading them or listening to them, you know, if you're on Amazon or Audible, you'll get a lot of recommendations for very similar books and ones that are in the same vein and kind of in this whole field of both logical biases and empowerment and things like that. So, yeah, go educate yourself. I guess we could speak just to the importance of going through these books that we found and continuing self-education too, which has been a really valuable process.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, sometimes it feels almost like there's almost a disconnect between running a small business like a float center and reading some of these books where they're talking about having like 1,000 employees or running factories.
What to do with my $5 million a year budget?
Yeah, exactly. So you gotta kind of like put it into the right perspective. But the important thing is taking the ideas and even if they don't seem immediately applicable, you're kind of in your head building up like a better tool set to respond to questions and issues in the future. When something comes up, when an employee says something and asks you how you want to deal with the situation, or when you're dealing with some sort of marketing thing, you kind of just like rattling back there in your head or these various pieces of advice you've had from reading these books. And, over time, as you build that up, it kind of gives you a better ability to kind of naturally respond in ways that I think are to the benefit of your business.
And with us having so many managers and different business owners, I felt like it almost gives us our own language to talk in. When we've gone through a lot of the similar texts and similar podcasts and just these lessons that we've learned from content we've taken in, we're able to reference those with each other and say, oh, maybe we should do like Chet says, an ultimate sales machine for this problem in front of us. Or, oh, maybe we should think about nudge and actually choose some really intelligent defaults instead of powering forward. And having those kind of mutual points of reference, I find, are really helpful. Yeah, definitely. Having a language you can communicate in on topics that are difficult to discuss, like the abstractness of running a business. Sometimes take an entire book to really get to the core of them, right? And now you can just reference it with a single word and say it's kind of like in nudge. All the books also have their own acronym. Like every business book nowadays seems to come out with like some acronym that stands for like the key lessons they're trying to get across in the book. My God, I wish they wouldn't do that. Really, which really seemed like whoever did it first had a good idea, and because it's been used so much, I don't remember any of them. Like I don't know anybody's acronyms or which ones were to do with which books. There's other ways to remember. Like they should come out with their own jingle or something. Like include a music file. In the So I don't know. That's just a funny thing you can, I'd say, wholeheartedly ignore as you read it in business books. You don't actually need to memorize those acronyms. No one uses them except that one author. Yeah. All right. So again, there's a little glimpse into our bookshelf, and especially some of the influential ones or ones that are both useful and at least entertaining and fun to go through too. Yeah. If you guys have other questions, you can go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast and send them over to us. I was going to say, keep them to yourself. We're done. That's not even a real link. It's just broken. All right, everyone. We'll talk at you tomorrow. Bye.